Attorney General for India, my dear friend Mr. Venkat Ramani, and if I ever adopt the suggestion given by him to Raj, I will ascribe it to him. So those who think that it's an extreme proposition on my behalf should trace it to the Attorney General. Vice Chancellor Raj Kumar, the usual dynamo of energy. He has put Jindal University right in the front, on the top of the map. His energy never ceases to amaze me, and I've spent a lot of hours in and outside of India with him. It also frightens me, and I also thank God that I've survived many of those energy-based travels. But he has another unique characteristic of constantly increasing my unbillable hours, and yet in the same breath accusing me of excessive billing. Both can't be true. Vice Chancellor Vajpayee runs a fantastic institution where I had the privilege of delivering the Bodhraj Memorial Lecture, and it's very good to see competitors as collaborators. That doesn't happen much, huh? In academia as well as in law. Professor Patnaik, who must be given an award for keeping pace with this dynamo of energy at Jindal, and for making the events happen at the pace and at the quantity and the frequency with which they are planned. Professor George, Ms. Chaudhary, distinguished members of the faculty, I see Professor Sudarshan, Professor Marx, Senior Advocate Mr. Sanjeev Sen, ladies and gentlemen, and above all, the students who Raj emphasized have been well fed for their early morning rush departure from Sonipat. Friends, the issue of administration of justice, this broad rubric can be summarized as reforms in the administration of justice, of which beating the backlog, the scourge of arrears, is the primary sub-aspect of this administration of justice. It's really a field of paradoxes in India. Very often sad paradoxes, because India has had the highest flights of jurisprudential fancy, the most sophisticated and nuanced doctrines of law, the most avant-garde concepts, the best and brightest in law are available in India, both in the bar and at the bench. The avant-garde, vibrant, pulsating new doctrines we have range from the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Remarkable concept in one sentence saying that even a constitutional amendment can be unconstitutional. PILs, judicial review of an extent and degree which would make Marbury and Madison blush many times over. And with all this, yet we have to necessarily hang our heads collectively in shame because of this scourge of backlog, this scourge of arrears, this scourge of pendency. And we were just sitting in the anteroom before we started here at the coffee, and somebody mentioned my father has spoken about it, subject. And I have been speaking about this for over 20 years. And yet, nothing much happens on the ground in terms of numbers, which is a telling and a sad commentary on this subject. All of our sermonizing, all of our seminarizing has reached us either to 5.5 crores or to 5.05 crores, or a figure I have of 4.97 crores, or a slightly earlier figure of 4.7 crores. It doesn't matter. At that level, all these numbers are meaningless. This is the range from last part of next year to current arrears. By the way, it's interesting, we forget that some of this was achieved by transferring the pendency from courts to tribunals. Nobody has done an accurate assessment of tribunals, but somebody published what I think is an inaccurate figure. The pendency in tribunals is supposed to be only, I repeat, a paltry 5.24 lakhs. I think it's much, much more. Maybe people have forgotten a large number of tribunals, because tribunals at the state level, at the central level, from the TDSAT to the NCLTs to the NCLATs to the Railway Rates Tribunal to the RERAs, would be definitely more than 5.24 lakhs. So after having done this sleight of hand of transferring matters, we still have so much. And it had, we had a very convenient, nice excuse some time ago, the COVID excuse. Even that excuse is not available now. But actually pre-COVID, we were down to 3.2. Don't forget, right in the midst of our sermonizing and seminarizing, we have increased from pre-COVID to post-COVID. COVID is long gone, 4 years away. So that excuse can't work anymore. It is increased to 5-ish or just under 5. Figures, of course, statistics are said to be misleading, but they can be very telling also. If you analyze into the details, they can be telling. Justice Kaul, in a judgment where he did me the honor of quoting one of my articles in the footnote, Lok Prahari judgment, also noticed that 54% of all the pendencies in all the high courts put together, this is a 2019 judgment, were in 5 high courts. Just that small little thing tells you where you must concentrate, calibrate, and focus your attack. You can't be fighting on all fronts together at the same time. So 54% at that time, I don't think it's changed much in these last 5-6 years. UP, Punjab, Madras, Bombay, and Rajasthan. Maybe a few more now, maybe a few less. And then you have these criminal and civil subdivisions, which should also tell you a message of how to attack. In the latest I have for the end of last year, and these figures vary, apparently criminal matters constitute the overwhelming bulk. A subject on which Professor Bajpai spoke a lot, criminal overwhelming. In my figures, 4.97 include 3.85 odd for criminal and 1.17 for civil. Now again, these may not be accurate, but it gives you a trend, it gives you an idea broadly of how to calibrate your attacks, how to calibrate your panaceas, your solutions. Another statistic tells you that you can easily deal with the ones which give India a bad name, our whole profession a bad name, collectively society a bad name. Above 10 years are not many cases at all. They may constitute only 7 to 8% of the total pendency. This is apart from what I've been speaking about at length, which Professor Bajpai mentioned, what are called infructuous numbers on a paper. But including those, I have for the life of me never understood why each high court, each district court does not set up a separate track to deal only with above 10. So you have this statistic that we have 5 cases above 30 years old pending. I think they can be disposed of in less than 5 days. But they remain forgotten numbers on a statistical calendar. And if the all India figure has less than 7-8% of that long duration, and 10 years, I mean, there are cases above 30, above 20. I'm talking above 10, which is a lower figure. Those cases, again, it gives you a third statistic, which gives you an idea of how to calibrate your responses. All these years, when I've been speaking, when my father was speaking on this subject, and when all of us have been collectively seminarizing and sermonizing, the maximum we have done is appoint committees and commissions, any number of them. And this is apart from the statutory bodies called the Law Commission, many, which always makes me, though you've heard it, some of you, repeat my favorite comment, quoting a wag, describing a committee as a group of the unfit, appointed by the unwilling to do the unnecessary. This applies more to arrears, pendency and backlog than to any other field, although it applies to a lot of other fields in India as well. But more apposite it is to this than to any other area. The funny and the sad part is that another phrase applies equally to this subject. What Benjamin Franklin said, for want of a horseshoe nail, a kingdom was lost. Very big, grandiose plans are not required. Commonsensical, nitty-gritty, small things are required to solve this problem. None of what I'm going to say is going to be rocket science. But you need a synergy. You need a continuity. You need a focus. A few preliminary points. One, that till recently, and I'm proud of the fact that I contributed to that change. I've been speaking on this for decades. Till recently, reforms in the administration of justice, entirely a focus on that subject, was not a taught course anywhere. Most law faculties don't have it. Most colleges, universities don't have it. Substantive law is important, contract, constitutional, civil, commercial. But this is equally important for those who intend to enter the ecosystem known as law. At the young level, to cultivate in the young minds an awareness of the ecosystem and its deformities alone can lead to a change as they enter. So I believe strongly that even better modules of semester-length courses on reforms in the administration of justice and how to beat this backlog must be designed. Even now, a few top-class universities may have it, but that's not, I'm talking of the many Indias in one syndrome. I'm talking of universities and law faculties which do not have it at all and which have no resemblance to Jindal or National Law, Dwarka. Everybody must have it. Secondly, we must have fewer sermons, possibly fewer seminars like this, more action on the ground. Words are important to rekindle and revive the sentiment, but action on the ground must follow. And I'm happy to learn from Raj that this is supposed to go along with a series of other state level and distributed discussions across India into a single composite nitty-gritty report. Thirdly, do not be deterred by these huge figures, set of figures thrown by each of us from a 5.5 to a 4.7 crore number. They are, in a very large measure, a pack of cards, a house of cards. Partly the infructuous point made earlier, which I intend to make. Fourthly, always follow Thomas Hardy's dictum. Take care of the small things, the big things will take care of themselves. Frequently, we don't take care of the small things. Fifthly, have a holistic approach, not a piecemeal. Have a curative and a preventive approach. Of course, to a large extent, we can only be curative now. But along with that must go preventive. And be bold and unconventional. And last but not the least, an attitudinal change. An attitudinal change has worked for years in the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court should never be a model for this because it's an island in the many Indias in one syndrome. Supreme Court had a structural, statistical pendency of over 1.78 lakhs in the 90s. It is now again increased, but in those days it was drastically brought down by mainly Justice Ahmadi, who also made a committee to create a ADR module. I was privileged to be part of that, more of that later. But it brought about in the 90s an attitudinal change in the Supreme Court, which attitudinal change you don't find in our district courts. You don't find in all the high courts. So these are some of the preliminary approaches. Well, as I said, you don't need rocket science to find out the reasons, and I'll come to the panaceas very quickly. But before that, take a simple example. Did you know that at any point of time since independence, at any point of time in our roughly 80-year-old history, 1/3 of all High Court sanctioned sanctioned posts were vacant. So you throw a stone in 1988, you throw a stone in 1998, you throw a stone in 1978. At any point of time, roughly 1/3, we have a paltry, ridiculous 1100 High Court judges odd. 1/3 are always vacant. In fact, the irony is that at least twice we have increased the sanction strength. So the sanction strength is X and we increase it to Y. And the funny part is after increasing to Y for decades, we are below X. Equally, did you know that at any point of time since independence, if you throw a stone, you will find 1/4 of the total district or lower judiciary posts vacant. Roughly 4,000 to 5,000 out of 25,000. Always. Now, does it require rocket science to tell you that you can have gleaming buildings, excellent hospitals, and fantastic equipment, but if you have no doctors, who will treat the patients? So all the infrastructure you can have, if you don't have enough judges, Raj talked about 15, it has crawled from 11 judges per million of population to either 15 or 18, as they say, depending on how you divide the population. Because population figures are a little changing. So let's assume the higher, better figure of 18. It has crawled from 11 to 18 by a Supreme Court judgment which went to a continuing mandamus for decades and used the danda to make these appointments at the district level. The absolute minimum India requires is 50 per million. And that's not a great figure. Maybe we can settle for 40. But we have now crawled, and this crawl has taken about 20 years. The figure was 11 in the early 2000, 2001, 2002 period. It is now, at best, 18. At worst, 15. It takes, if you are very, very lucky, about average of 13 years to climb from the lowest leg of the rung of the judiciary to the Supreme Court and close the matter. So let's look at some obvious panaceas, and I'm repeating the obvious and occasionally using some harsh words because Nani Palkhiwala always used to say that words must be sometimes an assault on the senses if reform is to follow. Also saying that if you had less zigzagging in India, you can take your time to decide a policy mix of 1 to 10, a 10-point program. But then you should consistently implement it over 5 to 7 years, and you'll see the results. Far too often, far too frequently, we have great ideas, but successors do zigzag supposed mid-course corrections. And their successors do further zigzag mid-course corrections. So the synergical effect of reform never takes root. This is something obvious, but something which is worth practicing in India, in the arrears reduction game. So to deal with the ABCD, the access, backlog, cost and delay issues arising, the first is obvious, to appoint more judges. Swaminathan Unkalsaria Iyer, in a study which I don't accept, said that you need to appoint only 2,000 judges, 94 in the upper judiciary, high judiciary, and 2,000 or 1,900 in the lower judiciary to bring arrears under control. I don't think that's quite correct, may require more. But it gives you an idea of how easily a problem can be tackled. You have to actually appoint them on the seat. They must be there. Now, an appointment, I always like to give the example that if non-lawyers, blind people were sent across the country to make a recommended list of 5 or 10 apposite lawyers who deserve to be elevated to the bench. Complete non-lawyers outside the legal ecosystem. If they were sent with that mandate, I can guarantee that they will tell you in 1 month's time the best 10 deserving elevation. What happens in India? You get to know those names for appointment, and then you start the process of disappointment. So, You know the length of time. All of us have our own stories who are in the profession. You know the length of time the hopefuls are kept hopefully waiting till they become dejected, depressed, and diverged. These are the practical parts of the legal ecosystem which doesn't work. There is no reason why, when I appoint you, a young man, at age 45 or 50 to the bench, I know your retirement age on that date. There is no reason why you do not have a culture where at least 1 week before the incumbent demits office, the successor must be notified. 1 month is the right figure, but let's say 2 weeks before. In fact, in Zest, in an article I wrote 15 years ago, it's not entirely in Zest now, but it certainly was intended in jest in that time. I said that the only way to make it work in India is to put another constitutional amendment saying that if you do not notify a successor 2 weeks before the retirement of the incumbent, then the incumbent must be deemed to continue till the successor is appointed. Not that that's the right solution at all. But that gives you an idea of how and why we distort a system which otherwise will not have these distortions. Now, in that appointment-disappointment matrix, everybody is at fault. And I'm not here to do any blame game, I'm talking of collective failure. But we must also remember that the politics of the judiciary will make the politics of politicians blush. Politics of judiciary is a reality. And if you have chosen to monopolize the appointment process, as you have done for about 35 odd years now, from the early 90s, then you cannot have it both ways. You have to take the blame for the vacancies. If you have found other alternative means projected for appointment to be unconstitutional, then you have to minimize this dangerous cocktail of bar politics, judicial politics, personal rivalry, egos, and government-judiciary conflicts. So I think unless you stop mincing words, this is the real area where bench strength will not increase, in which case whatever else you do, arrears will never reduce. And this applies to tribunals as well, by the way, where there's another story of decay and degeneration, which I don't have the time to go into. Secondly, you need to subject each court to a statistical analysis. Today you have the latest tools, latest tracks, latest methodologies, and you must therefore insist on having multiple tracks in each court. The lowest district court, the lowest civil court, the high court. All this doesn't really apply to the Supreme Court, where the arrears problem, I think, despite sometimes frightening numbers saying 1.5 lakhs or 70,000 or 80,000, is not really frightening given the Indian magnitude. It must, of course, keep on controlling arrears in the Supreme Court, but most of what I want to address is at the lower level, high courts and lower. Multiple tracks are a must after statistical assessment, and then further statistical assessment of the kind of matters which are clogging your system. It's not always the same. A Rajasthan High Court will have a different statistical profile than a Madras High Court, which in turn will have a different statistical profile than a West Bengal, Calcutta High Court. So it's very easy today. It's extremely easy today to give that statistical profile on only 3 fronts: pendency of time, category of matter, and other subcategories within that. Once you have that statistical thing, you must apply management techniques to set up a track which keeps abreast of current filings. Current filings are within a period of 3 to 5 months. And separate tracks to deal with the old above 10-year cases and hopefully above 5 and 10. Now obviously it has to go with my first suggestion of appointment and time. But even with today's vacancies, you should start that multiple track system, which you have not done. Third, the article which Justice Kaul did me the honor of citing, I had written long ago in Lok Prahari's judgment in 2019, he has cited it. saying that it is astonishing that a constitutional amendment which allows ad hoc judges to be appointed has never been used in the High Court as far as I know, maybe one or two exceptions, and been used 4 or 5 or 6 times in the Supreme Court. Now, it's not just statistics and numbers. You see, you have this politics, you have this inter-rivalry ego in new appointments. And you also have bad apples passing under the net when you do larger number of appointments. There are always some bad apples which pass through the net. In appointing ad hoc judges to fill vacancies on an ad hoc basis, you are using tried, tested and incumbent material where there is no problem. Till such time as you start speeding up the process and fill up the vacancies, why can't you use ad hoc judges in high courts? Now again, I believe very much in the Thomas Hardy taking care of the small things. I believe very much in nitty-gritty, and having spent after 7 years, it will be a half century in this profession. I know the inner workings of the system. As I told you, no high court has used this. But do you know why the Supreme Court stopped using it? Maybe even the attorney may not know. There were 4 or 5 cases where ad hoc judges were appointed. But apparently internally, there was some bickering and dispute as to whether if I am an ad hoc retired judge, or rather retired judge appointed as ad hoc judge, where I will sit on seniority. So I am more senior than Raj, who is a sitting judge. I have retired. Raj continues to be on the bench, is obviously senior to me. But when I appoint an ad hoc judge, many would be happy to sit lower down the seniority. But some may say I have to sit ahead of Raj, and then Raj may object.
I will not.
So the slightest bickering on this led to the abandonment even in the Supreme Court. So this is India. You have to wake up and smell the coffee. All the seminarizing and the sermonizing doesn't work. You have to cure these things. Anyway, if you were to do it and remember, the constitutional provision allows you to appoint in High Court X judges retired from that High Court, of course, but with consent of the central government and the sending Chief Justice of the other High Court, any other judge from any other High Court also. So the receiving High Court has to get these two consents, so you get some good material retired judge. You know the outstanding chaps who retired. They're happy to do actually service. 62 is no retirement age in India. By medical science or global standards, 62 is a ridiculous age. By the way, a small aside there. I was chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law, Justice, a very large portfolio, powerful committee, way back in 2011. So we made a report where we recommended that at the least equate 62 with 65. Make it 65 for all High Court judges. There is absolutely no rationale to have a 65 retirement for Supreme Court and 62 for High Court. So we got many positive responses, etc. We sent it to all the High Courts. Some of the interesting negative responses we got, one was that yes, that's a good idea, but let's then make Supreme Court 67.5. My committee received it in 2011. Another, of course, was that of course not, this should not happen because this was on the basis that the bureaucracy also should be made into 62 or then 65. On what basis you link and equate the bureaucracy with High Court independent judiciary, I don't know. But this has remained as it is. My report is 2011-12. We are now in 26. And let me tell you one more thing. This is about the real India, about the smell the coffee India. If you equate these two ages, this arbitrage, this is a bigger arbitrage than all your investment banks. This arbitrage of 3 years age is what makes a large amount of the darbars by which High Court judges are compelled to travel to Delhi and sit in darbars seeking elevation or seeking something because they are retiring at 62. I can guarantee if you equate this arbitrage, 50% of the various practices which we know but we don't talk about High Court judges seeking higher office or being at the beck and call or at the command of those who want something to be done, will stop. Again, despite my chairmanship of this committee in 2011-12 and a report which specifically recommends it, and there have been earlier than me reports also, this remains as we are, and we remain talking about arrears. We must also, fifthly, have a very strict, proper performance assessment. Much of what you're talking about, what I've talked about till now, is, of course, quantity. But as we've said earlier, quality is extremely important, because 10 average or below average judges appointed in that rush to fill the posts on quantitative terms can cause more damage than 5 good ones while keeping 5 vacant. The performance assessment has to be, somebody said, war is too serious to be left to generals. Law reform sometimes is too serious to be left to lawyers. By that you don't mean the actual war that is fought by the generals and the lawyers. It means the infrastructure or the arrangements or the logistics or the material around the war. So you must have management consultants design a performance assessment. And there is no reason. You know, for state judges in California, judges get, they have a standard management expert designed questionnaire which is sent to the entire ecosystem of the bar which practices there. And they send that through that expert body, get it filled up. It is mostly anonymous in the days when I saw it. I don't know about it now. It goes back with the result of that performance assessment to each judge. And this is not in all courts in US, but in many courts. And you get course correction on the basis of that. Now this maybe not, it will not work in India. I understand the ecosystem is not conducive, but certainly an internal confidential performance assessment reportable only to 2 people, the Chief Justice of the High Court and the Chief Justice of the country, is easily doable. And there should be no shame in it. There should be no hesitation in it, because these are things which improve, and this includes the speed of the judge is one thing, the absenteeism, the disposal, the nature of disposal, so many other parameters. The parameters are endless. Then, of course, there is the ADR revolution. I'm so happy that the current Chief Justice has decided that the weapon of mass destruction for this arrears problem is going to be mediation. Now, that's a very good thing. And we are now blessed with the latest state-of-the-art avant-garde Mediation Act in 2023. Thanks to Raj, I had occasion to speak at the Mecca of mediation, the global Mecca of mediation, which is Pepperdine University in California. And even they were very impressed with the avant-garde latest version of the act we have. But again, and remember, mediation is the intermediate way of solving the arrears problem, because on the one hand, we have this remarkable success of Lok Adalats. My last count is 2023 May, when we had disposed of 20 crore 79 lakhs by Lok Adalats. Imagine, that's 200 million plus. But unfortunately, it is limited to a category of cases which are susceptible to Lok Adalat, only 2, 3 or 5 categories, from land acquisition to motor accident vehicles, etc., etc. We had the very short-lived Gram Nyayalayas, which should be again revived in a much bigger way. Gram Nyayalayas for another category of petty civil and criminal offences. That again has gone under the radar. But ultimately, these are one extreme of a particular category which is susceptible to a particular category of disposal. The other extreme is the big failure. The other ADR, which is a big failure, is arbitration. That's also an ADR. It was originally created as a bypass to the heart disease called clogging of the legal arteries. Today we need ADRs to bypass arbitration. Arbitration has become pre-litigation litigation. It is nothing but adding one more separate prior limb to litigation, and that limb goes all the way to Supreme Court, despite all our 34s, 37s, and all the jurisprudential wisdom we have. So you have these two extremes. In between, really, the one thing which has not worked till now and should start now is mediation / conciliation, which I treat more or less as the same. Technically, they may be different. However, the Chief Justice of India, in a sense, made us smell the coffee on the reality. In a recent Bhubaneswar address in September 2025, he gave the startling statistic that we have only 13,000 trained mediators. And we need 2.5 lakh mediators, and he has identified and started the process of identifying 1.68 crores overall to provide in the next 10 years. Now that's very good, provided it gets done. Without that, without trained mediators on a war footing, this weapon of mass destruction will become a non-starter. A lot was spoken on criminal law. I was privileged to be over almost 2 decades the amicus in D.K. Basu. And I think that in criminal justice, given our prison population, highest in the world percentage of under trials, some well above their 50% of their maximum sentence, and most of them afflicted by one big crime, not the crime they've committed, the biggest crime of poverty. That, I think, requires a delivering justice, very, very major war on that. And I believe, I don't have time to take too much time more on this, I believe that you must now start experimenting with the anklet system for certain kinds of crime. There is absolutely, today GPS and technology allows you to be confined to either the room or the house, or even to one small room within the room, if you want. It is so accurate. All kinds of things can be done with technology. We must experiment, because no point shunting of people who are under trials into jail for years and years with no chance of seeing the light of the day. A constitution without timely justice is truly like a clock without hands. It may exist, but it cannot measure the life of a nation. There is another reason for errors which we tend to overlook, and that is how many times a matter is referred by the Supreme Court before it course corrects after 5 to 7 years. In the meanwhile, hundreds of progeny are spawned by that original Supreme Court judgment, which is course corrected on a reference by 5 or 7 judges after 10 years. I don't have time to give statistics, but I was myself part of original Balco, Bhatia, and then Balco. So between Bhatia and Balco's correction, the span of 7, 8, whatever years was there were about 100 Supreme Court progeny spawned by them. The poor High Court judge didn't know, so many followed Bhatia. Some deferred or distinguished. By the time Balco came, you had 2 different established lines of authority in this country. That is the legal uncertainty spawned by cases which ultimately resulted in Lalita Kumari. I'm giving you 3 or 4 examples. We know the FIR case. The 319 case law was settled by Hardeep Singh. Between the original Supreme Court judgment and the referred judgment, all these are taking roughly, between minimum of 2 to 5 years. Spawning progeny, spawning uncertainty. So these references must be decided soon, because either don't refer it, otherwise you are creating uncertainty and spawning, generating litigation by high courts. Faster justice doesn't mean rushing, it means ensuring that the marathon of litigation doesn't turn into a life sentence. Let me end also by saying that in the criminal justice system, we require another war on seriously filling up the human infrastructure. Maya Daruwala has written a very interesting article where she has made the point, the very significant point, that 1 out of 4 justice system workers are missing. The criminal law. Justice system worker includes the criminal hearing judge, the police, and the prison staff. She has done a statistical study and found 33 missing in the High Court level, 22 in the police level, and 33% in the prison staff level. Now, you cannot, these are all things which have to be synergically coordinated between the courts when you deliver justice and the people who are operating to deliver that justice. For example, 80% of the police forces on an average in most of the constabularies are constables. The supervisory and the technical staff vacancies are more than 35 to 40%. Cases fail because that staff and that supervisory and that excellence is not available. Friends, there is more we can speak of, but may I in conclusion say that our whole perspective has to change. We have to see ourselves as a service industry and re-visualize and reimagine the whole process from the point of view of Gandhiji's common man. From Gandhiji's point of view, as he used the phrase, the customer has to be king. The king here cannot be the lawyer, the judge, or the legal staff, or the clients, or the warring parties. King has to be the overall objective of a single man who sees the system from outside and comes back with a very, very poor opinion of it. He wails more often than not. He says, दोपहर तक बिक गया बाजार का हर एक झूठ. दोपहर तक बिक गया बाजार का हर एक झूठ. और मैं एक सच लेकर शाम तक बैठा रहा. This is the real human being who is the forgotten man of the Indian justice system. And it is for this person alone that we need to have our entire thinking, our entire thought process change. Thank you.